You want to know why? Ask how. Howard the Humongous! I'm sure that broke up. Okay, here's the deal. We need to talk seriously about truth. We need to talk seriously about courage. And all of this is brought up by the Gaza crisis. 3 weeks ago, just before the Gaza war broke out between Israel and Hamas, a producer in South America who is interested in working with a TV series that I'm putting together. I've got so many things going. Okay, it's the grand unified theory of everything in the universe, including the human soul. That producer sent me an absolutely lovely email, lengthy, trying to save me, explaining to me that in the proposal for the grand unified theory of everything in the universe, including the human soul, I had said that a certain event had taken place 11,000 years ago in Israel. She said, you do not want to use that word. Use the word Palestinian. Why? Because the word Israel, she said, indicates that you are getting political. And it might turn off some of the major funders who might be willing to back your television series. And it might turn off some of the major networks who might be willing to buy your television series. Your politics is something you have to keep to yourself. Then the Gaza war broke out, and I was stuck with a dilemma. Do I follow the incredibly caring and generous advice of this terrific person in South America? Do I keep my mouth shut so I can get the television series that I've been after since 1970 for 44 years? It is vital. That TV series is as vital to my life as my blood supply. Do I protect it by keeping quiet, or do I talk about the Gaza crisis? Do I talk about things that seem to me, after a lot of study and a lot of research, to be powerfully, importantly true? Well, there are two rules of science. I learned them when I was 10. And the first rule of science is this: the truth at any price, including the price of your life. Now, that's a law of courage. And I was, frankly, frightened to start opening my mouth about Israel and Hamas and Gaza. The question was, yes, you are frightened, but should you open your mouth anyway? Should you champion the truth? Well, I had an experience that was very useful once upon a time in the days when I was a stranger in a strange land, when I, not knowing anything about pop culture, had gotten into pop culture, become an expert on the subject apparently, and was running the biggest PR firm, or was about to run the biggest PR firm in the history of the music industry. At this time, I was just getting my feet wet in public relations. I was asked to found a public and artist relations department for Gulf and Western's 14 record companies. Gulf and Western was the biggest conglomerate of the time in an era when conglomerates were suddenly making the news. Gulf and Western was devouring so many smaller companies that Time magazine called it engulf and devour. Our president, Tony Martell, an incredible man, his son had been diagnosed with leukemia. The result was that Tony ceased running our company. He came into the office every day, locked his doors behind him, and spent the entire day trying to find the greatest leukemia researchers in the world, trying to save his son. You may have done the same thing under his circumstances. And our company was running without a rudder. Well, we were one of many companies that Gulf and Western owned. And among others, Gulf and Western owned a fabulously successful motion picture company, Paramount Pictures. Paramount Pictures was run by a person we'd only heard of in the tones reserved for legends. It was run by a man who was 5'4" and an absolute tyrant, we were told. And that man, Frank Yablans, seeing that our company was running without a rudder, went to the two guys who ran Gulf and Western and said, look at my success. Look at the lack of success of that dipshit little batch of record companies. If you let me control the little record companies, I will give you the kind of success that I have given you with my motion pictures. So one day, when we entered the office, there was a big room that none of us had really ever looked in. It was dark, and boxes of Xerox paper were kept there. What we didn't realize was it was actually a conference room. And on this particular day, when we went to our offices, all of us department heads, we noticed there was a light coming from this storage room. We peeked inside. There were no more boxes. The light was on. There was a big conference table. It was immaculate. It was spiffy as can be. And we were told there would be a staff meeting at 10 o'clock that morning. 10 o'clock that morning, a staff meeting? We'd never heard of a staff meeting before. None had ever existed in the time I was with the company because Tony Martell had come down with his problem of leukemia before I entered the company. We were summoned to the conference room, and in front of each of us on the conference table was an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And it had a list on it of something like 15, we didn't know what, 15 titles of some kind. Tony Martell, our president, an extraordinarily generous human being, walked into the room. He was about 6'2", walked down to the head of the table, sat down, and started talking. Then, all of a sudden, it felt as if clarion calls from trumpets had gone off behind us. It felt as if 1,000 lasers had suddenly pulsed. It felt as if somebody had entered the room in a chariot carried by clouds and goddesses. It was Frank Yulans, the president of Paramount Pictures. None of us saw him. We didn't have to. We felt his presence. And as Frank Yulans walked from behind us down the length of the conference table, Tony Martell, who had been a tall man when the meeting started, shrunk more and more and more and more. And finally, when 5'4" Frank Yulans reached the spot on the table where Tony sat, Tony slid out of his chair like a jellyfish and slid into the seat next to it. Frank Yulans took over the meeting. Frank Yulans looked at the agenda. He looked at the list of titles. He read the first title, turned to the executive on his immediate left, pointed, and said, you, what are you doing about this record? Record? None of us had ever heard of these records before. And I had heard in college about something called bullshitting. It was something you apparently did during an oral exam. I'd never seen it. I'd never done it. I didn't know what it was. Now I saw it in action. The first department head opened his mouth and gave a story so vivid, so glowing in detail that it was utterly persuasive about things he had never done on behalf of a record he'd never heard and never even heard of. Then Yulans turned to department head number 2 and said, what are you doing about this record? And department head number 2 gave a similar, very detailed, very exciting, very fictional blather. Number 4, Frank Yulans got to me, and he said, what are you doing about this record? And I stood up, and I said, Mr. Yulans, I'm not doing anything about this record. I'm not doing anything about any of the records on this list. They come from companies so feeble and weak that we don't even have the telephone numbers of the presidents of these companies. But yesterday, the A&R executive for Paramount Pictures, that's the talent scout, came to me and said, there is this incredible, exciting, astonishing, gorilla, gonzo, yada, 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 person I've just signed. Well, I knew immediately, he'd signed many people, they never went anywhere, that this was another nowhere act. He came to me and told me about a girl he'd just signed, a 13-year-old, from a Jewish neighborhood out in Crown Heights in Brooklyn, 5'2" tall, who he said was absolutely incredible. Well, he hit me with a problem. His singer was about to perform in a showcase at the Plaza Hotel, and the Plaza Hotel was only a few blocks away from my office at Columbus Circle on the 23rd floor overlooking Central Park. So I was obligated to go to see her simply because the distance was so short. And I had gone to see her. And I'd stepped into that room, which was set up like an amphitheater, a tiny little amphitheater, a nightclub, with ascending levels for the tables. I had stepped into that room and sat down at a table expecting absolutely nothing. And then this little dwarfish brown woman had stepped onto the stage, and from the minute she stepped onto that stage, it felt like she had grabbed you by the lapels. It felt as if she had gone nose to nose with you. And when she opened her mouth and began to sing, she held you, she riveted you utterly. And she held you riveted for 45 fucking minutes without let up. Then she left the stage. So I said to Frankie Blondes, I'm working on only one thing. I am working on the woman who I saw perform yesterday. And her name is Stephanie Mills. Frankie Blondes stood up, walked out of that meeting, and abandoned all of us. You know how you crowd to get out of a room, and if 5, 6, or 7 of you are trying to get out of the room simultaneously, you don't notice it, but you're squashed against each other? When we were squashed against each other to get out of the room, the vice president over my head grabbed my arm so hard that I had the marks of his fingers in my arm for a week. And he said, "You fucking nun. If you ever do that again, you're fired." When I got to my office, my secretary said, "You have a call from Mr. Yablon's office. They want to see you and Stephanie Mills tomorrow at noon. Paramount Pictures is gathering all of its department heads to see you." And the next day at noon, Stephanie Mills and I went up to introduce Stephanie Mills to the department heads. And from that point on, Frank Yablon's made me an unofficial member of his PR team. Every time he was putting together another blockbuster movie campaign, he called me in and he basically told his department heads, let him sit on the meeting, let him do anything he wants, whatever he wants, he'll deliver for us. 2 weeks later, the vice president over my head, the one who put the marks on my arms, who was a good man, a good, solid, ethical, moral man, was fired. Those are the wages of truth. If you stick with the truth, no matter how frightening it might seem, ultimately you will be rewarded. And you will know that you have done the right thing, even if you are punished in some horrible way. So when it came time for the Gaza crisis, and there were dozens of truths you weren't being told. Yes, all truths from the Israeli side, but the other side is being adequately represented. The truths of the other side are being heard all the time. The truths of the Israeli society or the Israeli side are being kept largely silent. And when it came time to make a decision about those truths, I had to decide that even if it threatened my career and threatened a project that I've been after for 44 years, the truth was more important. The truth at any price, including the price of your life. Aristotle said that courage is not something that comes to a man who has no fear and steps into a battle. A man who steps into a battle with no fear, he said, is an idiot. Courage is when a person who does have fear decides to override that fear, and for a good reason, step onto the battlefield. Anyway, the first rule of science, the truth at any price, including the price of your life, even if it's just one of many truths, but a truth that must be heard. The truth at any price, including the price of your life. This is Howard the Humongous, speaking to you from the future, that it's your job and my job to make. And now, for the infamously sneaky, utterly unfindable, bizarrely wandering,